Your Royal Highness, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for this opportunity. I really just want to talk about it from the perspective of the welfare sector, and to do that I just want to quickly recap what we mean by welfare. I think what's really important is that we recognize that welfare is actually all about how their horse copes with the world that it lives in. So that can be good welfare as well as bad welfare. So it's always got to come from the horse's perspective. For domesticated equines, however, their welfare is entirely dependent on what humans either do to them or don't do for them. And so in order to ensure their welfare, we actually have legislation in place which puts a legal responsibility on us all to provide for the welfare of our horses. So it allows us to protect them from unnecessary suffering, but it also ensures that we meet their needs so we can protect them from that likelihood to suffer. So the traditional stuff that we're all familiar with, which is animals being taken in and prosecutions happening, turns out to be a very small amount of the work that happens when you look at the statistics of the complaints that come into an organization like the RSPCA. So this would imply that an awful lot more of the situation either means there's nothing wrong with those horses or that the problem is solved a different way. And as it happens with the Animal Welfare Act, we have the potential to resolve the problems by talking to the owners or the keepers, giving them advice, and if they ignore that, we can actually compel them to make changes by giving improvement notices, warning notices. And as you can see, the vast majority of problems are actually dealt with just by talking with and to the owners. So this creates a challenge for us, given that the courts have agreed that most of the cases that are presented to them are worthy of convictions. So we're not under-prosecuting or over-prosecuting, I would argue. But we need to look at what we are doing to improve welfare across the UK. So owners are not always receptive to being told what to do, and I'm sure we can all identify with this. However, awareness amongst owners of the standards like the codes of practice and the legislation is sometimes very, very low. So this gives us scope to improve our competence at education and informing people. So when we have welfare concerns, our interventions need to be effective by being timely and proportionate, and they need to be based on evidence. Now, given that the Animal Welfare Act allows us to be proportionate, so we can look at the needs of the horse, but we can also understand the circumstance of the owner and find a solution that works for that situation. So we have the Animal Welfare Act, a very powerful tool. We have now the Control of Horses Act, which allows us to dispose of horses where we cannot actually resolve their challenges by working with an owner. But what we really need is to identify the owners of those horses so we can have those meaningful conversations. So actually, the Central Equine Database is going to allow us to overlap a much higher percentage of owners with the potential for the Animal Welfare Act to actually focus on the owners and the keepers. That will allow us to hopefully avoid more cases of prosecution or disposal of horses that are seized. And actually, I can confirm what Stuart said just now, that the trip checker has already proven hugely successful in welfare cases and in community events. So with community events, these are projects such as Equine Link and the BHS's healthcare clinics, which are ways in which the charities have reached out to the owners of horses that haven't identified in a way that's been easy to communicate with. So we've done this by providing subsidized passports, castrations, and other kinds of interventions that improve the welfare of that horse at that moment, but also, more importantly, opens up communication with the owners. So what are we getting from this? Well, we're able to educate owners, but we're also able to learn more about them and their keeping of horses. This allows us to develop how we approach the challenge, and more importantly, we now have horses that are microchipped and passported, which allows us to start using the Central Equine Database to be populated more effectively, which gives us another communication tool. So who are these hard-to-reach horse owners? Through the outreach projects, we're starting to get a grip on who these people might be. And as it turns out, it's no single group or single identity that we could say is hard to reach. It's usually related to localized issues that define what a hard-to-reach audience is going to be. So just as an example, we can have somebody who may not actually have kept a horse before, who's rescued it or bought it online. They may be unprepared for keeping a horse, and they could also be beyond the reach of mainstream education, be that equine education or general education, which then means that there's a horse that's going to be in need at some point. Often there are specific management challenges, so it could be horses kept in backyards, it could be horses kept tethered on common land that they have no right to be on. But if we reach these people through the community events where there's something they want from us in exchange for which we get to know who they are and understand more about their horse, these horses end up having one common factor, which is their passport, which then opens up the power of the Central Equine Database to link them to the owners, and that allows us to then start communicating and educating with those owners in a targeted way. So this is where I see the Central Equine Database playing a major role as a contributor towards better equine welfare across the UK. The digital stable will give horse owners some interest and some ownership, but I think it's also important to remember that different constituents of the horse industry are going to have different reasons for why they will go to the CED. Breeders and dealers will need to use it to buy and sell so that their records are correct and up to date. Other people might be interested in flu alerts or in importation, but we'll all have one thing in common, and that'll be that the passport and the CED will be our one go-to, and that allows the database maybe to open portals to trusted sources of information so that Dr. Google is no longer the default setting for people to learn more about their horse. So in my view, the future of the welfare industry and the welfare world is down to two things. The Central Equine Database is progressively going to make our enforcement much more effective, using the Animal Welfare Act here in Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland and beyond, much more effective. But enforcement's just one tool in the box. So actually it's changing the attitudes and the behaviours of the owners of horses that's really going to be where the future lies. And for this we also need to change and adapt by embracing the database and embracing how we approach people. And as a result, I think the CED offers this opportunity to reach owners of horses with the right information at the right time that they're interested in, which is going to benefit their horse, their horse's health, their horse's welfare. Thank you very much.